You have probably sat through a presentation that used slides filled with text. Maybe you even made a presentation like that yourself. In fact, many presentations are likely to use a lot of text because that's what presentation software pushes you to do. When you open up an application like PowerPoint or Google Slides, the first thing it asks you to do is to add text. But are text-heavy slides the best way to convey information? A presentation that uses both words and pictures is what we refer to as multimedia. The multimedia principle stipulates that information presented as both words and pictures are more effective than using words alone.
To study that, Richard Mayer and his colleagues compared two groups of learners. One group was presented with material with text alone, and another was presented the same information but in a multimedia format.
Some of the multimedia lessons use words and pictures on a printed page, some had words and animation on a screen, and some had words and pictures in a digital game. After each group had looked through the material, they were asked to take a transfer or comprehension test, which involved explaining what they learned or applying it to a new situation. In most cases, learners who were presented with multimedia did better on those tests than learners who were only presented with text. Now, you might be thinking of two things. First, isn't this obvious? Maybe, but not to everyone, especially as many people still tend to rely on text to convey information, even when including relevant visuals would have helped. More importantly, we should ask why it works. Perhaps you're thinking about learning styles. It might surprise you to learn that there's no scientific evidence to show that learning styles work. However, according to the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, what does work for learning is for learners to be able to make their own connections between what they see and what they hear and integrate it with their prior knowledge. That's why it helps to provide them with relevant visuals to go with the verbal information. That leads to the second thing. I had said earlier that in most cases, learners who were presented with multimedia did better. But what about the other cases? In the cases where learners who were presented with multimedia didn't do as well as the other group, the visuals they saw were either too complicated, irrelevant, or poorly labeled. In general, there are 6 types of illustrations. Decorative illustrations are usually used to grab the learner's attention or to fill up space. These visuals don't add any educational value to the material. Representational illustrations portray a single element, such as a photo of a bicycle pump. Although representational illustrations are better than decorative ones, they don't really convey that much more information either. What's most effective are organizational, relational, transformational, and interpretive illustrations. Organizational illustrations show qualitative information, like a table or an organizational chart. Relational illustrations show quantitative relationships, such as a bar graph or pie charts. Transformational illustrations show changes over time or space, such as a time-lapse video or a demonstration. And interpretive illustrations make abstract or unseen processes visible, such as an image showing how blood flows through the heart.
In a review of textbooks, Mayer and his colleagues found that most illustrations in textbooks are either decorative or representational, which means the illustrations are not only unhelpful to learning, they might actually distract from it.
This is also true for other types of multimedia, in which the content creator might include something cute or funny to grab the viewer's attention without realizing it actually leads to poorer results. A lot of educational videos you see online will fall into this trap, largely because many content creators online are more interested in keeping you watching than to make sure you learn effectively. If you plan on creating educational multimedia, then you need to make sure to minimize, if not eliminate, any use of decorative and representational imagery. The quality of the imagery also matters. Sometimes when you're looking for a visual to go with a presentation, it's tempting to just do an internet search and grab the first image you find. Let's say you're doing a lesson on the heart and you want to include an image of a heart. Which of these would you pick? This is a symbol of a heart, but if you have an anatomy lesson, then this symbolic representation wouldn't help and is in fact decorative. What about these two? Well, that depends on your lesson. While this detailed depiction of the heart might seem ideal, if your lesson doesn't require learners to know this level of detail, then a simpler version might be better. We'll have more to say about this when we discuss the coherence principle. The cognitive theory of multimedia learning stipulates that we take in information through a visual and auditory channel, and that each of both of these channels can be overloaded with too much information. Graphic organizers are shown sometimes to help learners learn more effectively. However, when learners are presented with too many graphic organizers or ones that are too complex, then these benefits go away. This might be because completing graphic organizers itself is a cognitive task that can lead to cognitive overload.
Another finding from Mayer's studies is that the multimedia principle seems to benefit learners who come with little or no prior knowledge on the topic the most.
High knowledge learners, in other words, learners who come with a lot of prior knowledge about the topic, might do less well on tests when there's too much guidance. This is something called the expertise reversal effect, which happens in other forms of instructional design as well. Advanced learners benefit from a more open-ended learning environment with less scaffolding and guidance, because they already come with their own mental models, and additional guidance can actually lead to interference and cognitive overload. Remember, the principles of multimedia learning are not laws of nature. Instead, it's best to think of them as guidelines and best practices that come with exceptions, and these exceptions are just as important as the principles themselves. So, in summary, the multimedia principle says that using words and visuals are more effective than using words alone, provided that the visuals are relevant and properly selected. The next time you design educational media, whether it's on a printed page or a presentation, make sure you find relevant imagery to go with the verbal information presented.